Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, today let's talk a little bit about standardization. Now, on the face of it, we can all agree that standardization, standards, having a common standard, for an organization means that we're hopefully doing things the same way and following that same routine, that same pathway, the same policies, processes, and procedures. The challenge is, though, is that oftentimes at the team level, technique sneaks into the arena of standards. And why can that happen? Well, it might be because best practices. Now, let me put some forks in this road. It can be that individuals, members of the team, say in a production facility, they've developed best practices, but those best practices weren't adopted into or have become standards. And so a little bit of shooting from the hip, these individuals then just use their technique to get the same result or better results in many cases. Maybe it's more efficient. But because no one listened to them, and I can't tell you how many times employees have said to me when I've gone through different organizations, they would say things like, well, the corporate side of the house just doesn't know what we do. They don't understand how our work is done, and they don't understand this or that or whatever, or they don't listen, right? So there is that fork that people doing the work have come up with, the best the best way of doing the work, the best way of achieving the best result. However, they shouldn't just shoot from the hip, right? We should make it known. We should really plant our flag and argue for the case. And the leaders, site leaders, need to know and be aware of these things for a couple of reasons. Because when you go to get audited, when an audit comes through, everybody needs to be following the procedures that are documented, right? Say what we do what we say, right? Whatever our policies, processes, and procedures are, this is the work that we should be doing. Not 2 days before an audit, oh, let's hurry up and make sure that it all checks, right? Getting ready for the audit. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to improve upon your policies, processes, and procedures, but then update and standardize your documentation and the fact that people are following that documentation. Another arena falls on the quality side of the house, quality product or service. You might have 3 different people who are doing the job in 3 different ways. They have 3 different techniques. Now, it may be that these 3 different techniques, and there's many industries out there, so we can't capture every scenario here, but simply, if all 3 are doing the job differently than what is documented as a standard, then they're all 3 doing it wrong. Get them to put their heads together, come up with a standardized way, and follow that way. That's how you want to do that. This is how you want to maintain your standards as well. But we definitely don't want to fail to listen to our teams, because for us to standardize, we need to be able to pull out these best practices from the people who are doing the work. That being said, it might be that bad habits are getting into those techniques. And if you have other people coming behind them getting trained, now they're learning these same bad habits. And this is no different whether you're building a product or whether you're doing, administrative work or whatever it is. We just can't be disconnected from what we agree upon and say that we do and what we actually do. Because you have planners out there that are costing work to customers based off of how we actually say we do the work. Okay, not the way it's written, and then we do it differently, right? So that's one fork in the road. Another arena is in standardization, where it comes when we're talking about teams and people working together and the team training and all that sort of thing, is standardizing the policies and processes. Now, we've just kind of talked about procedures more so, policies and processes. The corporate side can't have multiple policies for different sites unless they are product specific or site specific due to the unique nature, right, of that site and where it's located and that sort of thing. It could be that one site is in a, very cold climate. Another one is in a very warm climate. You know what I'm saying? We have different things going on at times. We're not talking about that. We're talking about standardizing how training is conducted, when training is conducted, the type of training that is conducted. We can't have different trainings and different ways of doing this training, especially if you're a multi-site corporation sort of a thing. You can't have multiple variants, right? Because you're not incorporating best practices. You're not standardized now. You are all over the map. And you may have one site that's producing well. There's great team cohesion. You got good feedback, good communication. They've got an O plan that is very succinct and tight. A very standardized way of handling what they do and following the processes and procedures and so forth. And then you may have another one that you're letting slip. You're not holding them to the same standard. And, this can happen, but not necessarily because of external environmental condition. This can happen just because of the newer sites versus older sites. You have long-term employees. You may be, let's just call it what it is, you're probably afraid to introduce into some of these folks who've been doing work the way they have for a long time, new policies and processes for what they do. That being said, you may be using new site situations and then trying to just scattershot this thing across multiple sites and trying to implement it, which brings me to the other fork in the road, implementation of your standards. The biggest failure of all of standardization is poorly implemented standards, poorly communicated, poorly trained, poor. To get ahead of the curve, you're going to have to communicate well ahead of implementation. And this is a fallacy that often occurs. Oh, next week we need to start A, B, C. No, time out. Unless it's some kind of federal or OSHA mandate that requires it and it's a safety-related thing, safety aside, we'll put that on its own shelf. Aside from safety, you need to give longer lead times for some of these transformational changes and procedural changes, especially around admin and training and things like that aren't technically affecting, say, product or service, although sometimes it can be that, right? Could be a sales thing. And I'll give you another comparison. You wouldn't tell your sales and marketing team, hey, next week we need to start this. No, they're already an established flow. You wouldn't do that, right? You would say, hey, you would lay it out, you would communicate it, and right? Give your production side, where the rubber meets the road, where the product gets made and some of the service and deliverables are actually achieved. Give those folks the same lead time, right? The same amount of planning and communication and thoughtfulness to implementation. If you're just doing this ad hoc, just quick, you're jerking a chain and you're going to mess up your productivity. You're going to mess up your productivity and probably your quality too. Because especially if you're just carbon copying one thing from one site into another. Okay, so don't do that. Give proper lead time, and don't just jam some training material under their nose and say, watch this video and do this thing, and now you know it. No, they don't know it. Most don't know things that they aren't coached through. Did you memorize, you watch a TV show, 30 minutes to an hour long. You might remember elements of it. Did you remember every element, every aspect of the show? Probably not. So now you're going to give your team members, you're going to have them fire hose something for 30 to 40 minutes, and then you're going to expect them to be able to just do this and be compliant? No, it doesn't work like that. Sorry to burst your bubble. It doesn't work like that. So there's many elements to standardization, implementation, getting at the team level, getting folks to be able to use best practices and come up with the one way for a particular, type of job or another and that sort of thing, or task related thing. and also how you implement and also what you implement, and regard your folks a little more highly when it comes to implementing these standards. That being said, you should have standards, and your standards shouldn't be all over the map. It shouldn't be different for a day shift individual than it is for a second or third shift individual. Your standards shouldn't be different in your East Coast plants compared to your West Coast plants, and so forth. Unless, of course, you're making different products and providing different services, then obviously those nuances will be different. Now, the final fork in the road is when you just implement from on high changes and say, boom, do these things. Okay, some of this stuff can be done and some of it has to be done, especially where OSHA is a consideration, right? Safety. But if you're not allowing for interaction and feedback, right? So let's say you've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions for some large entities into a particular thing, right? Without fully going through and organizing your site to be able to implement, it would be like building a home on top of a dump site. You wouldn't do it, right? You would lay a good foundation. And it's the same way when you implement some new ERP or other system. You should have somebody go through your different sites and clean them up and organize and make them and get their standardization tighter and fix up a little bit, even functionally, physically, right? Before you implement, because you may have things to consider before you start layering over, right? Building something new on top of a bunch of junk that you haven't cleaned up yet. So this is another way that implementation of new standards needs to be thoughtful. You really need to have an advanced team or individual or so forth go ahead, do an audit, make fixes, whether it be your continuous improvement or others, and get the folks up to speed manually before you create, an AI or electronic system that now would only be burdened by all the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of the old way that hasn't been a standard. People have been, say, doing the Wild West version of of the work. You think they're standardized, and now you've bought this brand new thing and you're going to just throw it out there to all your sites. Well, you're headed for a lot of failures, a lot of feedback, a lot of hiccups, a lot of bumps in the road. So I caution you by saying, send folks out, clean up your sites before you implement some big program. By doing so, you're going to make the transition to a more standardized and more efficient way of working, whether that be automation or others. You're going to eliminate a lot of issues before they become bigger problems later by handling them up front. Okay, folks, just a quick conversation there on standardization and implementation. All right, hit that good domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, motivate, inspire, and encourage folks. And when you do that, not only are we transforming, the culture, but we're transforming ourselves. That's an amazing thing. Hit like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.